welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a wonderful guest here today for the show. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Yes, my name is Jaqua. I'm currently in Portland, Oregon. I spend most of my time actually in South America, but and in Japan. But I'm very happy to be in the beautiful Northwest during this special time of year when the sun is out.
Wow. Can you tell us about everywhere you've been in their political cultures? Because you when you go somewhere, you actually stay there for a while. You don't just
Yes,
stay there. You learn about their culture.
exactly,
A little bit about
exactly.
that. Every culture.
Sure. Well, I back in the mid eight to late '80s, I decided to go to Japan. I was only going to be there for a year to learn the language. I ended up getting my master's degree in computer science there in Japanese, and then living and working in Japan many years. Then I went to China for some time. Actually, was married with to a Chinese woman and lived with her family for a while, and most recently South America. And so I've had a very rich and I think interesting life. And I think the thing that's most important is that I've seen the world and humankind from various points of view from very different cultures. And that's allowed me to see the wonderful commonality that we as humans have, but also a lot of the common problems. And the problems that plague our country are ones that can be explained in ways that are common to other countries as well. And that's why, based on that, the inspiration from my different experiences, I started this blog, the Solutions Party.
Well said. And we're going to dig a little further into each country. And I want to know about the lettering system because I read somewhere something popped up on my feed that said that China or even Japan has like 340 different dialogues or languages. Is that true?
Okay, yes. China is much more like Europe. You know, Europe is a collection of different countries and different languages, and China is as well. Now, how has China been unified? Well, it's actually, believe it or not, the writing system has unified the country because even though people spoke different languages, they could all read the same characters and the same written instructions from the emperor. And so, one of the interesting things about the Chinese language is that every syllable has meaning. And when I say that, for example, we think of like the word situation. It has how many syllables? Situation. Okay, those by themselves have no meaning. But in Chinese, every syllable has meaning, which means that you can paste a Chinese character on top of each syllable and make sentences. It's really a remarkable fusing of the spoken language and the written language.
Wow. What about their numerology system? Is it like I know they speak different from us, but are we all combined as one with our language system for the most part?
Well, it really depends what you mean. Are you talking about numbers? Are you
No,
talking just about,
numerology like one, two, three. Do they?
yeah? They have their own numbering system that is used in both China and Japan. But for technical subjects, they use the same numbering system that we do, because the numbering system that we have is very efficient for things like simple operations like multiplications, subtraction, division, and so for anything technical, they use the same numbering system as we do.
Okay. And one last question about that. I hear that you can. It's like painting a picture when you're building their words in context. They paint. It's a picture basically. It's not like a word per se, but it's like they build pictures off of their words.
Well,
Is that
basically, what it is that you have these characters. They're called in Japanese, they're called kanji, and in Chinese, they're called hanzi. And they are, yeah, they go from very simple to very, very complex, but there is sort of some order to them, and they usually are built up from tiny representations of real things. For example, the character for woman is basically sort of a simple drawing of a woman kneeling, and then from that, you could put you take the character for woman and you put a roof on top of it, and it can mean two things: safe or inexpensive. Which, yeah, I guess the idea is that, well, if the woman's in the house, she's safe, and if the woman's in the house, she's also inexpensive, which you can interpret as any way you want. And then if you put the character for woman together with the character for mouth, it means all the same, because the kind of the scholars, ancient scholars, thought, well, when it comes to the mouth, all women are the same. Uh,
I love it. I love it.
and so
Okay.
that's just an example. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Like, if we had to, you don't have to tell me your opinion, but I just wanted to know when you stayed in China for like 5 years, right?
Well, China, actually, I was there just for a year. I was in Japan almost 20 years, but China was significantly less.
We're going to talk about Japan and then kind of feedback on China with what I
Mhm.
have to say. Okay. So the political forces that's in Japan, do you think that they combine with helping the people, they're for the people? Like, based on what you see, are they actually for the people, where the people are not rich but making enough money to provide for their families and kids, versus coming here and we're promised stuff, and allegedly some people don't get what they're promised? Like, what do you
Right.
think about that?
Specifically about Japan.
Yes, just Japan.
Okay. Well, let me start off by saying, um, number one, that just like in any country, there's a lot of corruption in politics everywhere, um, and there's a vicious partisanship, and that impedes a lot of progress. But in general, Japan has been very successful because, for one thing, they've invested in a first-rate public education, so that kids all throughout the country, regardless of the region where they live or the neighborhood where they live, get an excellent education. And then the health system is also quite a bit better than ours. In fact, I actually had an experience with the health system here at the same time with here in the U.S. and in Japan and in Peru, and I can go into detail to compare those three systems. But I could tell you my experience with the three, and by far the worst was our country. But for example, I could go to I hurt my knee very badly right before I went to Japan, and I went to a doctor in Japan, and they charged. I waited for an hour. They charged me $100. I saw a real doctor, and they gave me a procedure. But then when I came back to the U.S., I went to the emergency room. I waited 4 hours, virtually for nothing. I paid $2,500 for that, and so even though I had insurance here, and so I didn't have insurance in Japan, but I paid 1/25, and I waited 1/4 the time. And this was, of course, this was back before Obamacare, but still, the fact that they have invested much better in their public health than we have. So education and health and infrastructure, they've got wonderful infrastructure. And these are very, very important things. Having great infrastructure, having great public education, and having great medical care are three very fundamental things that determine how prosperous a society is. When you start neglecting those three things, the country's going to suffer. Prosperity will suffer.
Well said, by the way. I wanted to say that when I went to Korea, because I went to Korea for a year because I'm a veteran, their phones were so out of this world back then in like 2004. Like, they had smartphones before smartphones came out here in the United
Right.
States. Is it true that they have phones that are more technological, savvy than
Well,
ours here?
they used to, and they were called feature phones. And I used to have them when I was in Japan. But the feature phones, then they came with a user manual that was about a half an inch thick. And I'm actually a computer specialist, and even I would have trouble figuring out how to use them. The revolution occurred with the iPhone, and so you have this very sophisticated graphical interface combined with a very powerful, um, computational capabilities. And so, actually, right now, I would say that because the iPhone is such a sophisticated device, and so are the Android devices, that there's not the difference that there used to be between the phones before the iPhone and the phones now.
Well said. And do you know about the invisible military technology where they having cloaks and they have military gear that they're trying to make sure everything is invisible for weaponiza- weaponization, no problems, or in the future if it happens to come to that. But what I read on YouTube was so astonishing, sir. They had like cloaks you can put over your head and you're totally invisible. They have like chameleon structure where you put something over your, and that's basic for the army, but the invisible technology that they have will make you 100% non-visible because of the ingredients they use to, the heat sensors and all that great
Right.
stuff. Have you heard about that?
I've heard something about that. I've heard it's. I don't know how ready it is to actually be deployed,
it's,
but I knew that. What's that?
it's not all the way ready yet, you're right.
Right, right. I know that it's something that they're actually working on, but with a lot of technical technology, it's just a matter of time before they finally get the bugs worked out. But yeah, I have heard of that. Like I say, I don't know if it's ready to be taken the show on the road here yet. But and then the other thing is, even if they develop that, these become like an arm race where the other side will develop technologies to detect those things, and so I don't think it's going to be the final military solution, because the other side will find ways to detect it in some way.
That is true. It's always some way to detect something. One last question before we move on to your career. Okay, so did you hear about China having its own harvesting sun in a laboratory? Did you hear about that? How they have a sun that's more powerful than the sun outer space, is 10 times stronger, and have nuclear weapons that's 10 times stronger than the nuclear weapons that's out there.
I haven't heard of that, but it sounds like what you're referring to is must be a fusion technology, because the sun is based on fusion. It
Yes.
runs on fusion, and the only presently an H bomb, for example, works by fusing hydrogen into helium, and so in order to go more powerful than that, you would have to fuse elements that are heavier elements, and whether or not they actually have been able to do that or not is that because the nuclear physics involved are so complex to make that happen. So I don't know how far along they are, and even if they do develop that, I personally think that our present nuclear deterrent is more than enough uh, to protect us. Even if they can blow up half the U.S. with one bomb, we could still blow them up, half of them or more than them, with 10 or 15 bombs. So I don't think it's going to make that much difference.
I love it. So, what do you do again for a living to the audience that's out there watching?
Well, my career is, as I mentioned, I got my master's degree in information technology, computer science in Japan, and I was working. I have been working in that many years. Primarily, what I was doing was helping U.S. companies establish a presence, U.S. IT companies establish a presence in Japan. A number of years ago, I actually moved my operations to Peru because I wanted to be in a part of the world that was growing and a little more dynamic market-wise. And I eventually actually got into aviation, because aviation and computer science are actually quite closely linked. If you go into a cockpit of any modern aircraft, it's got an amazing amount of computational power. And so right now I'm primarily in the field of aviation, but as I have had the wonderful opportunity to see, the politics and cultures and people from different points of view, I have used that inspiration to form this blog that I've started, which is not an official party yet, the Solutions Party, but I'm looking for others who might be interested in joining on this effort, and we'll see where it goes.
Well said. And I will be interested. I just wanted to know, with your computer technology, where do you see uh, aircrafts going for the future? First we had, the Wright brothers, one just
Right.
big plane and you're just
Right.
flying. Then you had like the straight engines, and they changed the engines, certain airplanes, but where do you see it? It's like 500 miles an hour, right?
Yes, right. But they do have, as you probably are aware of, they have the ability to have passenger aircraft go much faster, like with the
Really?
Concorde. Yeah, the Concorde supersonic aircraft. But the problem with those aircraft is that they use an incredible amount of fuel, and they usually have very limited capacity, which means that the ticket prices are, usually $20,000. And, it's just it's the sort of most people would rather spend 1/20th of that, even if they're going to have to spend a few more hours in the aircraft. And so creating a much faster aircraft is probably not, at least presently, economically that viable, except for the ultra rich. And there are ultra rich who will be willing to pay that to save 3 or 4 hours crossing the Atlantic, but most people are not going to do that. And so I think the biggest the biggest trend will be moving toward sustainable fuels,
Yeah,
biofuels,
yeah.
um, because that's just where there's just a lot of pressure to reduce the carbon footprint of, yeah, of things in general, but aircraft in this case.
Now, do you think it, what's that? Do you think if we go up to 600 miles per hour, that would waste fuel based on the fuel context of it being a certain fuel that
Well,
distributes?
well, 600 miles an hour is actually quite doable now. A lot of it has to do with, in fact, I think most aircraft can come pretty close to that. I think a lot of it also has to do with which way the winds are blowing. I mean, I know, like, I'm being serious. Like, if you fly to Japan, it's 12 hours. Flying back from Japan is 10 hours because of the winds. The winds flow eastward from Japan. It's called the trade winds. And the Japanese during World War II took advantage of that to send balloons with devices to start fires in our forest. But because when you fly to Japan, because you're going against the wind, you're flying significantly slower. And I think there have been cases where I've been on aircraft when the winds are particularly strong. They're going like 650 miles an hour because the wind is so strong. And yeah, you can cross it much more quickly. So a lot of it has to do with the which way the winds are blowing. But 600 miles an hour is definitely not that um, that out of the question. But the only thing I will say is that sometimes to go from 550 to 600 involves using much higher percentage of fuel than makes it worth it.
Where do you think we can find that fuel from? Computer scientists, aviation guy,
Oh, you mean the fuel for
the newer model fuel. Like, do you think it's on another planet source, or do you think it's here in the world, on the world somewhere that we haven't tapped into yet?
Well, no, I think that the fuel that is used in aircraft are they're two things. They're basically carbon based, which means they're fossil fuels, which means the stuff we get out of the ground, or they're biofuels, which we've converted plant material into jet fuel. And so, but those things, because of the chemical properties, have only certain amount of potential energy, and so you're not going to get a leap forward in terms of explosiveness unless you. I mean, you could if you used much more like the sort of things rockets, but that's that sort of chemical energy is so volatile that normally you don't want to. Yeah, you wouldn't want to use that in a passenger aircraft.
Well said. We're going to move on to one more subject on aviation, and then I want to talk about your project that you just mentioned.
Sure.
Now, we got Jeff Bezos, and we got that wants to take us around the world in their jet ship. He's still working on that. Probably he's been doing it with a couple people, but he's working on it. Then you got Elon Musk that wants to divert to a different planet and grow life from
Right.
there. Do you think that this is pretty cool for the future? Do you think it's going to happen in the next decade or 2 decades? What do you think is good, the pros and the cons? Go ahead.
Well, I really think that it's in our DNA to want to expand and to move into outer space. And I think that it's just a question of time. But the challenges are extremely immense. I mean, for example, to go to Mars with our present rocket technology is about a 6-month trip. And during those 6 months, you're exposed to all sorts of solar radiation, like cosmic rays, which unfortunately are we don't have materials to defend against that or to protect against that.
Yeah,
Yet,
yeah. Don't ever.
yet yet it's but it's going to be kind of hard because cosmic rays actually can penetrate the entire Earth. They flow through the Earth, and so it's going to be very difficult to come up with materials that actually protect us from that. I'm all for space travel. I just think that we're going to have to come up with a much faster propulsion system to really go off into places even relatively close by, like Mars. And in terms of colonizing, that's going to be kind of tough too. I think that would actually what would be more practical would be to set up living spaces that orbit the Earth, because you could do that much easier than you could colonizing Mars, for example.
Well said. And I just wanted to know, like, I think that you got me there. That is such a great idea, by the way. How long does it take it's 3 days to get to the moon, right?
Roughly, yeah. Uh-huh.
Have we tapped into what's underground in the moon that could help our planet?
Well, that's one of the things they're actually trying to do right now. They want to send one of the biggest missions NASA has right now is to send uh, spaceship to Mars. I'm probably sorry, to the moon to land on the South Pole, because the South Pole of the moon apparently has ice, which means water. And if you have water, then you can do all sorts of things. You can host, um, living spaces there, because you don't have to transport water from the Earth. And you can also use that water to make even rocket fuel, so that you can then launch missions from the moon to Mars.
God, I didn't know that. You told me
Yes.
something. Oh my
Yeah. So,
goodness.
and it's actually a huge source of competition now between us and China, because the Chinese and other countries have the same thing. And the fear is that the Chinese get there first, they're going to claim it as their own, which would give them a huge advantage in terms of, further space exploration.
Wow. And one last question, and then we're gonna move on. It just popped in my head. Is any other planet other than Mars and the moon habitable, or the outskirts of outer space, like you said?
Well, actually, Mars is not really habitable, sadly, because it doesn't have an atmosphere, and the temperatures are very, very cold. You could put living spaces there with with oxygen and heat, but also the gravity is so significantly less, so people's muscles and bones are going to weaken over time there. Um, but Venus is out of the question. It's far too hot. Mercury even less so. And then after Mars, the next planet is Jupiter, which you can't land anything there, because it's called what's called a gas giant, which means it doesn't really have a solid surface. So
Okay,
the
so
only
maybe
hope,
we should be getting our gases from Saturn.
what's that?
What if we can get our gases from Saturn, check out Saturn in a way we can orbit and get that gas and see if that gas can help us, because all of them have a reason for being in our solar system. They can help
Right.
a habitable planet. Each and every one of them have a different gas or energy source, right?
Well, yeah, they do. I don't know how useful the gas, for example, the gases around Jupiter, and going to Jupiter to get gas would be extremely expensive, and
Okay.
so you might not it might not be worth the effort, to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to get a few $1 million worth of gas, and
Well
so
said.
probably the best. Basically, for outer space, the best resources that we could tap into would be things like, well, minerals on the moon, or minerals in asteroids. So there could be a lot of precious material we could get from there. In terms of energy sources, I think our best choice is to use the energy sources we have here: solar, wind, tidal, using tidal energy, geothermal. We have, energy is everywhere, and there's no reason for us to be basing our energy needs on a non-renewable and dirty resource like fossil fuels.
Is Pluto habitable? Not a habitable. It's a star, or is what
No,
is it?
Pluto is what's called a dwarf planet.
Yeah, a
It,
dwarf. Yes, I
it's
remember.
it's actually, I think it might even be smaller than our moon. It used to be considered the ninth planet, but it was demoted because of its size. Poor guy, the poor guy.
Can you
But
tell? I hate to move on because I know I'm cut for time. So tell me about the project that you got going on for.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, you know, a number of years ago, about 40 years ago, actually, in fact, a little over 40 years ago, Ronald Reagan, when he said when he was running for president, he said that government isn't the solution, government is the problem. And I think that it would be more accurate to say that all of our problems really come down to one basic thing, and that's our politicians. And why are our politicians the source of the problem? Well, as we were talking about earlier, the human mind or the human brain sadly gets addicted to things very easily. People get addicted to gambling, people get addicted to video games, people get addicted to drugs, to medications, to tobacco. The human brain gets addicted to things, and one of the most addictive things, in fact, probably the most addictive thing that there is power. And as President George Bush said, he said the power is addictive. And as John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, he said, you give people little power and they completely change. And the problem is that once you give people power, they don't want to give it up. This is why, for example, the Syrian dictator will drop barrel bombs on civilians to stay in power. This is why the North Korean dictator will send entire families to gruesome prison camps to stay in power. This is why Vladimir Putin poisons his opponent and invades Ukraine. But this is also why our politicians, their first priority is staying in power and reelection, and their partisan interest and supporting the partisan interests that help them achieve that. And the first question that our politicians ask themselves when a bill is proposed is, how is it going to affect me politically? And and we don't want that. We don't want, we shouldn't want our politicians going to Washington or going to their local state capital or wherever with the idea of first priority staying in power. We want them to work and do their best job, regardless of whether or not it's going to affect their political career. And sadly, the only way to make that happen is to eliminate reelection. You give politicians, people elected office, one chance to make a difference. There's not going to, one chance to make a difference. And instead of concentrating on getting reelected and doing what you have to get reelected and saying what you have to get reelected, just concentrate on doing your job. And then after your term is over, you have to wait 2 years before you can run for another office. You can never run for that same office again. And so we want our politicians to go into office with the idea of getting things done, making a contribution, making their mark on history, and then moving on, because that's not what we have now. Our politicians, for example, when after the 2020 election, when 150 of the Republican representatives voted to decertify the election, they knew that Trump had lost. But why did they vote to decertify the election? They did it because they thought, they made the political calculation that that was in their best interest. And we don't want our politicians putting their own political careers first. We want our politicians to go in there to do the work that we've asked them to do, to advocate for the ideas that we've endorsed, and then to move on. And so that's the basic premise: is let's first of all eliminate reelection and have our politicians concentrating exclusively on doing their job during their term in office. And then from there, there's actually a whole bunch of other things that need to be reformed. For example, I put propose a 12-year limit on political parties, because political parties, sadly, in our country, have become too tribal and they become too bitter. And we should put let me back up and say George Washington actually warned against political parties, that they become institutionalized, which means that they start putting their own priorities ahead of the priorities of the country. And so, what's the way to deal with that? Well, we put a 12-year limit on political parties, and I should say government recognized political parties. And after 12 years, they have to be disbanded. The idea is to keep them from becoming what they are now, which are basically, mindless tribes. You know, I'm sorry for going on this, but for example, I can remember when I was, a teenager and Jimmy Carter was running for president. I was working in rural Utah, and people could say, well, I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for, Jimmy Carter or Gerald Ford. People were open to listening to the different parties and what they had to propose. And now it's become so tribal that people just automatically vote one party or the other. And that's not the way it should be. We should make our elections based on ideas, not on tribalism and emotions.
That is amazing what you said. Only thing I would have to say, because I'm here for your opinion. It we if you have a law on that and have that go into effect, that should be it should be no smearing of somebody else's campaign. Now, if he lost, he lost. If he didn't, he didn't. But just think about how they smeared him. Donald Trump. They
Well,
smeared
yeah.
everything about him and made it so hard for him. He was so focused on everything else going on the far right that he didn't see what it was just so crazy. So it
Well,
should be. Go ahead, your opinion.
yeah, well, that's exactly why I have proposed that we hold people or politicians and candidates for office um, accountable for telling the truth. For example, a candidate running for office, when they lie, when they spread purposely misinformation or lie, they should be consequences for that. They should either be penalized or even in extreme cases disqualified. And you say, well, that might sound extreme, but think about if you had somebody applying for a job and they lied on the interview, they would be disqualified. They should be disqualified. Or after they were hired, if you caught them lying, they would be fired. And it should be even more, that should be even more strongly enforced when we're talking about our political candidates and our office, because they do an extreme disservice when they lie and they spread disinformation. And so that's one of the reasons why I have proposed that it's called No Country for Lying Politicians, the particular blog entry, is that we take methods to evaluate the truthfulness of what they're saying. Have sort of like Rotten Tomatoes. Are you familiar with Rotten Tomatoes? You have a bunch of critics who can evaluate a movie, and if 90% of them say it's a good movie, you can be pretty confident it's a good movie. The same thing. We should have multiple ways to evaluate the different statements and positions of our politicians. Come up with a trustworthiness score, and if it's and that should be posted right next to their name on the ballot. If they have a very low trustworthiness score, then that should be a red flag about whether to vote for them or not. We want to encourage our politicians to tell the truth, to just focus on the ideas, to not purposely distort or slander the positions or the ideas or even the personalities of other candidates. Let's have a mature, idea focused, based elections, not emotions based on smearing and lying.
Well done. Okay. I want to talk to you more about this. Yeah, that's true. You got all your ducks in a row with that, and I appreciate that. I wanted to know, where do you see yourself going for the future, and then we're going to end there with how to find you.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm just starting this off, uh, publishing different articles. I'm writing an article on immigration right now, but the idea is to do exactly what I'm doing now: is to participate in podcasts, and to start, you know, talking with other people, hopefully getting others interested, because I think the country is ripe for change. I think we're all sick of the politics as usual. We're sick of the partisanship. We're sick of the tribalism. We're sick of the ineffectiveness of how things are now. But I think it's very critical also to emphasize that this is a very I know there's a lot of talk about democracy being in danger, and believe me, I believe it is in danger. And this is a critical time in history whereby the future of democracy is going to be determined. And so,
Can I ask you a question? What did
sure.
you write your paper on about immigration? How is your feelings about immigration, by the way?
Well, one of the things that I think we must recognize is that the enemies of democracy, one aspect of immigration is that the enemies of democracy are using immigration as a weapon against us. They are causing chaos and misery in a lot of different countries. And these people, a lot of desperate people, flee to come to the places most associated with freedom and prosperity, the United States and Europe. And this is causing terrible culture war issues. It shouldn't. And like you hear people saying, "Well, these immigrants are criminals." And the vast majority are not criminals. They're desperate people who are escaping the horrible cartel-based violence or the horrible corruption or the horrible poverty, just like we would if the situation were here. And so what we need to do is come up with a way to turn immigration on its head, where it becomes where immigrants become ways to we want, first of all, everybody to come illegally. We don't want people coming in willy-nilly, but we want immigrants to contribute to our prosperity and to actually turning the present situation on its head, where they actually work to help weaken the autocracies and the tyrants of the world.
That's well said. And I would say that, if they come over here the right way, it could be about 20 or 30 decades from now, they be the next president that's a Mexican. We never know. That can change the world for good. We never
It's
know. You know,
yes,
only thing I have is that, I think that something is happening. It's a good part of this. I agree, but it's a bad part of it too. It's an agenda. To me, it's some type of, like you said, weaponization. I feel like it's an agenda that they bring them here and blackmail them to do things that they possibly don't want to do. It could go both ways, but I've experienced it hand and foot with I've been around two cartel members, and I've been around people that are not so good people. But I'll say this: they are good people. There are good Mexicans out there. I'm not going to smash them and say that they're not.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah. The vast majority of the people who seek refuge are good people, I believe. You're going to always have some bad apples, but you know, so much of this, of our problems with immigration, at least from South and Central America, have to do with our completely failed war on drugs. And what we have now is a very perverse situation where we have millions of addicted Americans sending billions of dollars to the cartels in Central and South America. And these cartels, because they have so much money and they're so ruthlessly violent, they control every aspect of the society in which they operate. They control the politicians, they control the judges, they control the police, they control the bureaucrats, they control the armed forces. And so, and so, because of the extreme violence which exists all the way from Mexico all the way down into South America, people are seeing no choice to escape that. I mean, for example, if some gang members come and say, "Okay, your boy's going to work for us, and your daughter's going to service us, and if you don't like it, we'll kill you all. Oh, and by the way, if you have a business, we want you to give us 30% of all your income every month. If you don't like it, we'll kill you." And under those circumstances, if we had a circumstance like that in this country, how many of us would escape to Mexico if we felt that was our only way to escape this horror? And
well said.
so we one of the things that we have to do is to get rid of the drug cartels, and the way to do that.
What's the scary part? If you go back to religion in the Christianity time, they did the same exact thing in the beginning to control the people that wanted to just save their villages. They made examples out of them. And they said, "You're going to worship us." They said, "If you don't worship us, we're going to kill you, as Christians." Did you
Right.
hear about that?
I've heard similar things. Yes.
Yeah. And it's just like the cartel is doing that right now, and it's a scary thing. It's a very scary thing to take over a city full of people, judges, and everything. It's scary.
But
Corrupt? It's corrupted.
yeah. But what's also horrible is, well, I'm here in Portland, Oregon, but on the West Coast, you just see so many people who are hopelessly addicted to drugs. And
Yeah,
why are they addicted to drugs? Because uh, many of them were vulnerable kids in high school, and they become befriended by drug dealers who become their friend, but then push them to take drugs. Because once you get somebody addicted to the product you're selling, you've got a great business because you know that person's going to come back and come back and come back and buy. And
it's
so
like
much,
the apple. It's like eating the apple that Eve and Adam ate. They don't want us woke, so they keep us drugged.
right? Yes. And so, well, believe me, anything that has to do with the drug business is all about money. And so the people, so many of our the people, in like in Portland, they just, it never used to be like this, but now you get on like the public transportation, and it's like 40% of the people have got clearly some addiction issue. And when I was in college, for example, there might have been a couple of people who were sort of, we called them potheads, but now you have fentanyl users, very right in our colleges. And the reason is because there's a lot of money being made. For example, I have a friend who works in Peruvian customs.
Mhm.
She says they seize fentanyl that comes from China that's on its way to the US. Okay, why would China do this? Well, China does this because, for one thing, they make a lot of money. It's a very good way to make money, because if you're getting people addicted, they do what they have to buy the
Why
product they're
don't
addicted
the
to.
president of the United States stop it? Why can't we stop it? It's too easy to stop it. It's a cut deal. It's some type of corrupted deal going on.
Well, the problem is that there's so many ways for it to get into the country
Okay.
that we would, to examine every suitcase, every container, is just not practical. The only way, the only way to win this is to destroy the economics. You've got to make it non profitable to sell drugs. If you can destroy the economics, you win the drug war, and that's what I proposed in how to end the drug war.
Your last words. What are your last words before we cut the feed and people learn how to follow you? What are your 2 minutes? I want to know.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you can, the Solutions Party, it's just thesolutionsparty.org. Um, if you go to the website, and then you can reach me at info@solutionsparty.org, the email. And I just, this is a time not to despair. It's actually solutionsparty.org, not thesolutionsparty.org. But this is not a time to despair. This is the time that we've got to come together and to think boldly and to question politics as usual. And it's within our power to make changes, and we can make changes. And this is a critical time to do it. And, I would really love to work with others to move this forward. And I think that, like I say, the country is ripe for this. I think we're all tired of how our politics are not working. And I think we're also very concerned about the future of our country and the future of the planet, and with good reason. But there are solutions. There are ways we can work forward or move forward on this. But it starts with, first of all, major political reform. And that starts with eliminating the possibility to get addicted to power, because that's the fundamental problem with our politicians now. They get addicted, and they don't want to give. I mean, it's actually shown to be physiologically true that people get addicted to the brain changes once they get addicted to power, and
I
so we have to start there.
Okay. Stay on the line. You guys give him a round of applause. One last question. Do you see yourself going to Congress or the White House to talk about these solutions, the solution party?
Well, I haven't really thought about that. I'm not necessarily running for office. I would love to have people running for office based on these ideas, but this is not about me at all, and I don't want this ever to be about me.
Yes.
I would rather be like the unknown soldier, who maybe made a difference but was never remembered, than to be remembered but never having really done anything to help move things forward. And so the only thing that matters to me is that we come together and we move forward based on these ideas and even better ideas. Let's put our heads together and come up with even better ways to make things happen.
Well said. Stay, well said. Evan Jaqua, it is
Actually, Jaqua.
Jaqua. I thought
Nobody
I
gets that right. Nobody gets that right.
Evan Jaqua, y'all give him a round of applause. Take care. Stay on the line. You guys, y'all rock. Y'all stay cool. I'll see y'all in a bit. Bye.